Assalamu alaikum everyone. This is Roman Sayed. So I was assigned to discuss the book From Ritual to Romance by Jessis Weston. Jessie's book is basically an examination of the roots of King Arthur. Basically, it deals with the Arthurian legends that we already know about. Many of us know about the Grail or conquest of Holy Grail and the folklores and stories related to it. Basically, King Arthur was a British legendary leader, and he is the character is embedded in many of the medieval histories and romances and stories, as he was such a legendary leader. Now, Ritual to Romance, basically, Jessie has written this book. And there are many connections in the book that relates it to the pagan and Christian elements, and as I've already told you, it discusses or focuses on Holy Grail tradition, and it basically contains a wasteland motive that I'll be explaining, that relates it to our poem The Wasteland by Eliot as well. Now, what is a wasteland motive? Basically, wasteland motive is a Celtic motive that is described as that it ties the barrenness of a land with the curse, and that curse must only be lifted by a hero or by a legendary character. So basically, the wasteland is said to be a barren land, and it can only be saved by a particular hero that has some heroic qualities about him. He must be brave and everything that a hero must be. Weston's book was published in 1920. And it is said that it's firmly related to the tradition of Fraser's The Golden Bow as well. Like Weston also took some, I guess, elements or influence from The Golden Bow of Fraser as well. That will be explained by my other groupmate later on. It is said that both Weston and Fraser used in their book the vegetation rituals. Vegetation rituals is related to a symbolic representation of death and rebirth of the year that we have seen in the wasteland as well. Now, basically, in this story, or in the story of Weston, Jessie Weston's book, they are, as discussed earlier, that they are related to the Holy Grail and the conquest of Holy Grail. In this book, basically the central idea of in this book, or the relation that will directly link it with our poem, is that there is a king, and known as a fisherman king, basically. The fisherman king is basically crippled by a magical wound, and spends his days fishing on a lake near his castle, and his lands are desolate and fertile, just same as the land in the poem of Wasteland. Like they are said to be the wastelands, they are barren as a result of his wound. And there are basically the main important characters in Weston's readings are Fisher King, an immortal guardian of the Grail, Percival, a knight from Arthur's court. So the knight Percival eventually comes to the castle of the Fisher King in search of the Holy Grail, and Percival heals the king, restoring the land to fertility and becoming keeper of the Grail. So the motive of that wasteland is served, and the curse is uplifted by a hero Percival when he comes to the land to rid it of its barrenness and infertility. That is explained in the book Ritual of the Romance that I have searched upon or looked upon. There are many points in the Wasteland, the poem Wasteland by Eliot, where he has described, or where he has alluded to Weston's story. We haven't I think most of us haven't actually read that part as well, because in line 51 or in lines 189 to 192, he's alluding to the fisher king. Like he's saying, while I was fishing in the dull canal on the winter evening, round behind the gas house, musing upon the king my brother's wreck, and on the king my father's death before him. So basically, we haven't read that part, but later on it will come, I guess, in third section of the poem, the games of chess, I guess. So the Eliot will be alluding to Weston's work. Eliot himself has said about ritual of the romance, like he has pinpointed that he has used as the Weston's work as a muse, or has used her work as inspiration. Like he himself says that not only the title but the plan and a good deal of the incidental symbolism of the poem were suggested by Miss Jessie L. Weston's book on the Grail Legend, from ritual to romance. Indeed, so deeply am I indebted. Miss Weston's book will elucidate the difficulties of the poem much better than my notes can do, and I recommend it to any who thinks such elucidation of the poem worth the trouble. So he has basically told or pinpointed that he had actually used taken the inspiration from ritual to romance and used Miss Weston's book. Similarly, he says that anyone who is acquainted with these works will, he's referring to the Golden Bow as well, will immediately recognize in the poem certain references to vegetation ceremonies. That I have already told you about vegetation ceremonies or vegetation rituals, that they are related to the death and rebirth of the year. It's a symbolic representation, and in the poem we have also seen death and the elements or the themes of death and rebirth again and again. Similarly, if I personally alluded or symbolized the poem with the story of the wasteland, I'll say that the implication of the prophets, the Jesus, in the third, I guess in the third narration of the first part, the burial of dead, we see that Jesus is said to be the savior of the mankind, and Christianity or the pagan elements or the religion is said to be the savior of mankind, that will save man, save humanity from indulgence, from the wastelanders, from the barrenness of the land, and their thirst will quench when they will come in the shadow of Christianity. So I'll relate it with the quest of the Grail as well. Like Grail was the last cup, or I guess last goblet that Holy Christ himself drank from in his last supper. So it is related that only in the conquest of religion, only under the guise of religion, or only under the veil of religion, one is saved, and that is what is relating the Weston's work with wasteland. And again, her vegetation rituals are related to as well. The wasteland motive is related to the wasteland, the poem Wasteland as well. There was a mention of tarot pack of cards in the notes that Eliot himself had written regarding the symbols, or the regarding what parts of the stories he used to write his poem. So there was an implication of tarot cards as well, that will be discussed in the poem in, I guess, sixth part of the poem as well. So basically the symbols of the Grail Legend, tarot cards, the vegetation rituals are related to the poem Wasteland, and obviously we can relate King Percival to Jesus as well, as he was the savior of that barren land, and Fisher King can be related to the wastelanders who are like psychologically or mentally unfit and are spiritually dead, as the Fisher King had a wound that made the whole land barren and infertile. So we can say that wastelanders are after post-war era, the wastelanders had become so psychologically misfit that they were said to be the land or wherever they were said to be the barren land, without any growth or without any reawakening, or they were dead spiritually. So as Jesus is a muse or savior for them, so Percival was the savior for Fisher King as well. But there is a slight indifference between both the poem and the book Ritual to Romance, but where that it is said that whereas Eliot's poem is all about loss of faith and takes on a highly fragmented form, Weston seems assured of renewing the sense of meaning in modern life by deepening the roots of her culture's religious life beyond Christianity and further into the ancient past. So she was more inclined towards Christianity, and she had, I guess, an element of more faith in her story. Rather, Eliot's poem is inclined towards loss of faith. So these are some of the elements that relate this poem with the story.
Assalamu alaikum, ma'am. My name is Ara Iqbal and my roll number is 1705. And I was given the topic from ritual to romance. So, first of all, I would like to apologize because I could not go through all of the material due to the shortage of time, but I tried my best to gain as much as I could in the past 1 hour, and I'm going to interpret that. So basically, first of all, From Ritual to Romance is a scholarly book, and it's not a piece of literature. This is something that is something very important in, I feel, because it deals with the different methodologies and the archetypal stories of that time, and the main one is that of a king who was named as Kingfisher. So I'm gonna go back to the story in a while. First of all, I would like to talk about the Holy Grail. So the Holy Grail, the reference of the Holy Grail is a main theme of From Ritual to Romance. And what is a Holy Grail? Basically, Holy Grail was the relic that the Christians believed that the in which the blood of the Christ fell before he was tormented on the cross. And since they really respect that relic, they feel that it's a symbol of power, authority, and whoever is able to achieve that will be successful for life. So, the archetypal story in From Ritual to Romance is that of a king who was named as Kingfisher. Once upon a time, he became ill, or you can say impotent, and as a result, his kingdom turned desolate. So he needed a remedy for that. The brave king then set off to obtain the Holy Grail, which was the only way that could bring life and fruitfulness back to his kingdom. But obviously the king had to face numerous obstacles and different hurdles. And near the end of the journey, he had to pass through the perilous chapel, which was his biggest challenge. So this chapel is also again a symbol of Christianity, of religion, of faith, of how faith is very important to humankind. And when the king finally finds the grail, he restores his kingdom, and he becomes rejoiced as he was before. So this story is interpreted um, indirectly actually, in the poem by T.S. Eliot, The Wasteland. He has also used the words the kingfisher, I think, in his poem. But since we have not read the whole poem, so I'm not really sure where he has used this phrase actually. But the point that T.S. Eliot wants to make here through the reference of this poem is that, and also one more thing, that T.S. Eliot wrote this poem 2 years after From Ritual to Romance was published. And the main reason to link his own poem with this reference was because he feels that each person is a supreme authority in his own way, and he has to go through the same you know a process of rebirth, regeneration, of hurdles and obstacles in order to regain, in order to regenerate, in order to go for redemption. So he feels that everyone is Kingfisher in one way or the other, and the Wastelanders were more resembling to them, because they had lost their previous glory, their good times, their success, and they had to go through the process of spiritual awakening in order to get redemption. So we all are connected to, or the Wastelanders were connected to, Kingfisher in a very direct manner. And also, the conclusion I think I would just draw is that T.S. Eliot, in his poem The Wasteland, he points out to the Wastelanders that you have to have that power, you have to have that Holy Grail, you have to have that connection with religion if you want to get back to your original position, if you want to get back to your original glory. So that's it for now, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum, ma'am. My name is Nimra Afzal, and you have assigned me the topic from the reference from Ritual to Romance by Weston's book. It's a book of by Weston's, and there is a connection between this poem and this book, and this all connection is all about the Grail Legion. And T.S. Eliot made no attempt to hide the fact that Weston's book about the Grail Legion was of paramount importance to the structure and symbolism of the wasteland. And from this book, we can easily understand the concept of this poem. In this book, it's a very effective way to understand this poem if we read this poem. And so, in this book, the talks ab- the writer talks about the Holy Grail of Holy Grail, uh, and in this book, the story of the Grail was co-opted by Christians in their ongoing efforts to convert everyone and everything in the world. Before the Christians made the Grail a holy relic, it featured in other tales of the knight errant variety, and the stories all have similarities but vary from instance, often evolving as time goes by. So eventually, the Grail becomes combined with the Arthuriana and becomes part of the Camelot legend. However, these stories are scattered and various, strange, and Weston's project from ritual to romance was to trace them back in order to find uh, the true origin of the Grail. So this all book is about the Grail Legion, and there is and this reference we can find in the Wasteland that and T.S. Eliot used this uh, reference from this book.
Ma'am, I am Anisa. First of all, I would like to apologize that the topic which was assigned to me, I was not able to give it on time because of the internet issue and the severe electricity problem. So the topic which was given to me was Ritual to Romance, and it is actually a book, and it is a scholarly book that is written by Weston Jessis, and it deals with the methodologies and the different stories. And the main story behind or in this book was the story of the king named the Kingfisherman. So King Arthur was a British legendary leader. His character is embedded in many of his medieval histories and romances in the story. He was such a legendary hero. So Ritual to Romance, basically Jessis has written this book, and there are many connections in these books that relate with Christian and pagan elements. Basically, a wasteland is a barren land, and it can only be saved by a particular hero that has some heroic qualities. Like the Western book, it was actually published in 1920, and it is said that it is directly related to Fraser's Golden Buff, and Western also took the influence from Fraser's Golden Buff. It is said that both Fraser and Weston used vegetation ritualness. These are actually the symbolic representation of death and rebirth. So we can see this in Wasteland as well. The main story in Jessis' Western book is that it is actually related to Holy Grail or the conquest of Holy Grail. The basic idea that is linked with the Jessis book and the poem that we are reading is like that there is a king which is known as Fisherman King, and the Fisherman King is crippled by magical wound, and he spent his days on a lake near his castle, and his land is desolate, same like a wasteland. So we can say that the wasteland, it is actually same like the wasteland that is barren. And the main character in Western books are Fisher King is immortal guardian of the Grail and knights from Art's court. So the knights festival come to the castle of the Fisher King in search of Holy Grail. And later on, King Percival heals the king, restoring the land's fertility, and he becomes the keeper of the Grail. So we can say that the main idea that the wasteland is saved and the curse is uplifted by hero when he comes to the land. This thing is actually explained in this book, Ritual to Romance, and there are so many ideas in Eliot's poem where he described the Western story. Later on in the poem, he is alluding the Fisher King and the second section of the poem, The Game of the Chess, he is alluding the Weston's work. Actually, Eliot was so much inspired by Weston's work that even the symbolism he used that was suggested by Jessis, and he says that anyone can be inspired, and he also referred to Golden Buff, the element of death and rebirth was seen again and again, like in the third part or in the of the first section we can see the Christian elements or the paganistic ideas, like he talked about the Christian church or the prophet, and he says that the Jesus is said to be the savior of the mankind and the religion is said to be the survivor of the mankind. So only there is religion which can save the humanity from the wastelanders. We can also relate it with the quest of the Grail, as a Grail was the last cup that the Holy Christ himself grabbed from his Last Supper. So it is related that only in the quest of the religion and only under the shadow of religion only one can saved. This is actually what Western work is related with the wasteland. Here we can relate the King Percival is like a Jesus, as well as he was the savior of the barren land. So the kingfisher can be related to the wastelander, who are just like mentally unfit and spiritually dead people. So we can say that after the World War, the wastelander, they have so much psychological issues and they are spiritually dead. So the Jesus was the savior for them. That was all from my side. Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Muhammad Umair Khan and I am going to explain the relation of the wasteland of T.S. Eliot with the ritual to romance of L. Weston's. T.S. Eliot has great respect, and he thinks that the book L. Weston has written explains much of his works and much of his ideas which he has embedded in the book The Wasteland, the way people have gone to despair and people have actually embraced disappointment and materialism and their life only based on sex obsession, wealth obsession, fashion, all these things. And so he thinks that in the context of spirituality it is related. Actually the book Ritual to Romance talks about the legends of the Holy Grail. Holy Grail was the cup from which Christ drank at the Last Supper. So Christ, after the crucifixion of Christ, there was blood in that Holy Grail, and someone drank who was blind, and he was cured of that blindness. So it is thing to be as it is taken as the symbol of we can say that miracle or some supreme thing, or we can say the supernatural thing. So this cup actually and there is a legend about a king who has lost his kingdom and all his glory, and there is a knight who is on a journey, and he actually faces a chapel where he faces the most difficult challenges of his life, and after that he finds the Holy Grail, and all the glory and the successes of the kingdom has been restored. So this is how it talks about spirituality, that if we are through a spiritual journey, so we can attain that morality and all those ethical values which we have lost in this materialistic world. As after the World War I, we can see that modernists has actually lost all these, and they were so obsessive about sex and wealth and fashion and all these things. So I think that this is how these two books have a relation in common, and so that's why T.S. Eliot has great respect for this book. As we can see in the very first stanzas, that April is the cruelest month, that these people think that this is the cruelest month, but it reflects activity, regeneration, rebirth. But for those people who have find joy in the disappointment and despair and materialism. They think that April is the coolest month and winter makes them happy and warm. And so here in this very first stanza at the very end, Mary says that hold on tight, down we went. And there is a description of sled, which is I think that spiritual journey on which we can have a spiritual journey. So it tells that she tells that hold on tight, that we must not lose it, so that we can through this materialistic rubbish, and we towards the spirituality. So he says that I read much of the night and go south in the winter. So south reflects warmness and summer climate. So I think this is how in the whole poem he explains the relation of spirituality with materialism. So he thinks that Al Bostan's book has relation with his poem. Thank you.